The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile, its ceiling disappearing into darkness above, while lights from 1,000 worlds flickered through crystal windows that had witnessed 10,000 years of alien politics. President Elena Vasquez walked through the massive doors with her head held high, though her heart carried the weight of 8 billion souls back on Earth and another 12 billion scattered across humanity's struggling colonies. She made this walk 47 times in her 12 years as Earth's leader, and each time the aliens looked at her the same way a person might look at an insect crawling across their dinner table. The Valtteri High Speaker sat at the center of the curved council table, his pale blue skin glowing softly under the artificial lights, his 4 eyes watching Elena with barely hidden contempt as she took her seat at the far end of the table where humanity had been assigned since joining the Council 3 decades ago. "We thank the human representative for attending," the High Speaker said, his translator device turning his clicking language into cold English words. "Though we understand that your species finds it difficult to travel such distances." Soft laughter rippled through the chamber from the other 11 species present, and Elena kept her face still as stone while rage burned in her chest. She remembered her grandmother's stories about the first contact, about how humanity had celebrated when the Valtteri ships appeared in Earth's sky, about how people had danced in the streets believing that the universe had sent them friends and teachers. Instead, the universe had sent them masters who saw humans as nothing more than useful animals. The first 10 years after contact had stripped away humanity's innocence, as the Valtteri and their allied species carved up human space like butchers dividing meat, taking the richest planets, the most valuable asteroid belts, and leaving humanity with the scraps when humans protested. The Council explained that newer species had to earn their place through service and patience when humans demanded their rights under galactic law. The Council explained that those laws were written by advanced species for advanced species when humans threatened to fight. The Council laughed and reminded them that a single Valtteri battleship could glass Earth's surface in an afternoon, so humanity had learned to bow and scrape and beg, sending their best diplomats to plead for basic dignity while their children grew up on dying colonies stripped of resources. Elena had watched her own father waste away from a disease that alien medicine could cure in minutes. But the Council had decided that sharing medical technology with primitive species would disrupt the natural order. She had held his hand as he died, and she had made a promise to herself that his death would mean something. "We have gathered today to discuss the ongoing situation in the Kepler sector," the Valtteri High Speaker announced, pulling Elena from her memories, "where human colonists continue to resist the lawful administration of Valtteri resource extraction operations." Elena's hands tightened under the table as she thought of Kepler's Gate, a mining colony of 2 million humans who had been told to abandon their homes so the Valtteri could strip the planet's core. The colonists had refused, and now Valtteri soldiers patrolled their streets while their children went hungry. "The Council has prepared a generous offer," the High Speaker continued with a smile that showed too many teeth. "One that will bring lasting peace to the sector and demonstrate humanity's commitment to galactic cooperation." He pressed a button and a holographic display appeared above the table showing human space, or what remained of it after 3 decades of steady losses. "First, humanity will withdraw all claims to the Outer Rim territories, approximately 40% of your current holdings." Elena heard her aide gasp softly behind her, but she kept her eyes on the map. "Second, humanity will reduce its fleet to defensive levels only, which our analysts have determined to be 30% of your current naval capacity." The other species at the table nodded approvingly, and Elena saw the Krethian ambassador actually smile. "Third, humanity will accept observer status in Council affairs, allowing you to attend meetings and voice concerns while voting rights are suspended for a period of no less than 50 years. The High Speaker turned off the display and folded his four hands together in a gesture Elena had learned to recognize as smug satisfaction. In exchange, the Council will allow human colonists to remain on Kepler's Gate under Valtteri supervision. And we will consider reopening discussions about medical technology sharing at some point in the future. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Elena the way a cat looks at a mouse it has cornered. Surely the humans understand their place now, he said. And the chamber filled with the soft sounds of alien amusement. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the eyes of 12 species upon her. Feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders, she thought of her father dying in a hospital bed that lacked medicine, sitting in alien warehouses just light years away. She thought of children on Kepler's Gate crying themselves to sleep while Valtteri soldiers laughed in their streets. She thought of 3 decades of insults and humiliation and broken promises, and she thought of the secret that burned inside her, the knowledge that gave her the strength to do what she was about to do. President Elena Vasquez stood slowly, pushing her chair back with a sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet chamber. When humanity first met your ships, she began, her voice calm and clear. We thought we had found brothers among the stars. The Valtteri High Speaker's smile flickered with uncertainty. We offered you friendship, and you gave us chains, Elena continued. We offered you partnership, and you gave us servitude. She picked up the folder containing the Council's proposal and held it before her. For 30 years, we have come to this chamber with open hands, begging for scraps of dignity from species who see us as animals. She tore the folder in half, and the sound cracked through the air like thunder. We offered compromise, she said, her voice rising. We pleaded for peace. We humiliated ourselves, hoping that you might one day see us as equals. She threw the torn papers onto the table. But you don't want peace, she declared, her eyes meeting the High Speaker's gaze without flinching. You want submission. You want slaves who smile while you rob them. And you have mistaken our patience for weakness. The chamber had gone completely silent. Every alien frozen in shock at the small human woman who dared to raise her voice in these sacred halls. Elena Vasquez straightened her jacket and spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. Enough talking, she said. Let's begin the war. The Valtteri High Speaker laughed first, a high clicking sound that spread through the chamber as the other species joined in, their amusement filling the great hall. They laughed at the human who thought her dying species could challenge the might of the Galactic Council. They laughed at her pride and her foolishness. They had no idea that they were laughing at their own destruction as Elena walked out of the chamber with her delegation following close behind. She allowed herself a small smile. The trap had been set for 30 years, and now it was time to spring it. Let them laugh. She thought they would not be laughing for long. The galaxy expected humanity to collapse within weeks, and every military analyst from the Valtteri Dominion to the Krethian Empire calculated that Earth would be burning before the month ended. They based their predictions on simple facts that everyone knew to be true. Humanity had fewer ships, weaker weapons, and less experience than any species in the Council. Their fleet numbered perhaps 300 vessels, most of them aging cargo haulers converted into makeshift warships. The Valtteri alone commanded over 4,000 battleships, each one capable of destroying a human cruiser with a single volley. It was not even a contest in the minds of the alien strategists, just a brief and bloody lesson that would teach future primitive species to know their place. What the galaxy did not know, what no one outside humanity's innermost circle suspected, was that humans had been preparing for this exact moment since the day they first understood what the aliens truly thought of them. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the battleship Prometheus and watched the stars through the main viewport as his communications officer confirmed that the signal had been sent. Operation Awakening is active, the officer reported. All units responding. Chun nodded slowly and allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in 30 years of patient waiting hope across human space. In asteroid fields that appeared empty on every scan, in moons that seemed barren and worthless, in deep space stations disguised as mining platforms, massive doors began to open. The Prometheus fleet emerged from its hiding places. 700 warships that had been built in absolute secrecy over 3 decades of careful planning. Each ship was designed using everything humanity had learned about alien technology, but twisted and improved in ways the aliens had never imagined. The Valkyrie relied on energy shields that could stop plasma weapons. So human engineers had developed kinetic accelerators that fired tungsten rods at a fraction of light speed. The Crethian ships used predictive computers to anticipate enemy movements. So human vessels were programmed to fly in deliberately chaotic patterns that no algorithm could forecast. Every weakness, every blind spot, every arrogant assumption the aliens had made about warfare had been studied and exploited. Admiral, the communications officer said with a trembling voice, the Valkyrie response fleet has entered the Kepler sector. They have 112 ships. Chun smiled grimly as he remembered the years of insults he had endured. The times alien officers had laughed at human military parades and called their soldiers amusing pets. Send the signal to General Tanaka, he ordered. Tell her it's time to wake the wolves on 18 occupied human worlds. People who had lived as loyal servants suddenly revealed their true nature. The Valkyrie had allowed humans to work in their households, their factories, their military installations, never suspecting that these quiet workers were members of humanity's most secret organization. General Yuki Tanaka had spent 2 decades building a network of sleeper agents, ordinary people who went about their ordinary lives while memorizing every detail of alien defenses, communication systems, and patrol schedules. When the signal came, they moved with perfect coordination on Valkyrie Prime itself. Human servants disabled the planetary defense grid for exactly 17 minutes, long enough for a single stealth ship to slip through and deploy a weapon that would reshape the war. Dr. Samuel Okonkwo had called it the Helix virus, a masterpiece of digital warfare that spread through Valkyrie systems like fire through dry grass within hours. The Dominion's military communications collapsed into chaos as ships lost contact with command, as officers received contradictory orders, as targeting systems began identifying friendly vessels as enemies. The mighty Valkyrie war machine, built over centuries of conquest, was suddenly deaf and blind. Admiral, the tactical officer reported with barely contained excitement. Valkyrie fleet formation is breaking apart. They're trying to re-establish communications, but every frequency is compromised. Chun watched the enemy ships scatter on his display and thought of his grandfather, who had been forced to bow before Valkyrie soldiers as they seized his family's farm on Mars. All ships, he commanded, begin attack pattern Omega. Show them what happens when you corner humanity. The Battle of Kepler's Gate lasted 43 minutes. Human ships struck from multiple directions at once, their weapons tearing through confused enemy formations that could not coordinate their defensive. Valkyrie captains screamed for orders that never came, while human missiles found their targets with terrible precision. When the firing stopped, 60 Valkyrie warships drifted as burning wreckage, while only 4 human vessels had been lost across the galaxy. Alien species watched the battle footage in stunned silence. This was impossible. Their experts insisted primitive humans could not defeat the Valkyrie, could not build ships that advanced, could not execute tactics that sophisticated. but the evidence floated among the stars. Twisted metal and frozen bodies that proved humanity was not what anyone had believed on the Council worlds. Panic began to spread as governments realized that their military assessments had been catastrophically wrong. Crethian Emperor demanded to know how humanity had hidden an entire fleet for 30 years. The Zithran Collective, oldest and wisest of all species, began urgent debates about whether neutrality might be the safest path, and in the smoking ruins of their communication centers, the Velthari High Speaker stared at reports he could not comprehend while his advisors shouted contradictory advice. How? He demanded of his military commanders. How did the humans do this? No one had an answer because no one had ever bothered. To truly understand humanity, they had seen a young species with inferior technology and assumed they knew everything worth knowing. They had loonies humans bow and scrape and beg, and they had mistaken survival strategy for weakness. They had laughed at human diplomats pleading for peace, never realizing that those same diplomats were buying time for the greatest military buildup in galactic history. President Elena Vasquez addressed her people from Earth's capital, her face projected on screens across every human world and station. For 30 years, we smiled while they stole from us, she said. For 30 years, we begged while they laughed at us. For 30 years, we prepared while they underestimated us. Her eyes seemed to burn with cold fire as she continued. Today, the galaxy learned a truth that our ancestors knew for 10,000 years. You can beat a human, you can rob a human, you can humiliate a human, but you cannot break us. She raised her fist to the camera. We are awake now, and we will never bow again on every human world. People watched their president speak and felt something stir in their hearts, something that had been dormant during the long years of submission pride. The wolves had revealed their teeth, and the hunt had begun in the weeks that followed. Humanity struck again and again, their fleets appearing where no one expected and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. They freed occupied colonies and captured alien supply depots. They turned the Velthari's own tactics against them, using speed and surprise to overcome superior numbers. The galaxy watched a species they had dismissed as primitive rewrite the rules of interstellar warfare, and, in quiet rooms across 100 worlds, alien leaders began to whisper a question that would have seemed absurd just months before. What if the humans win? The Zithran Collective had watched the rise and fall of empires for over 50,000 years, their crystalline bodies unchanging while biological species flourished and faded like flowers in spring. They had seen the Velthari conquer half the galaxy and believed nothing could challenge their power. They had dismissed humanity as another brief chapter in the long story of young species, learning their place. Now their greatest scholars gathered in the crystal halls of their homeworld to study the impossible events unfolding across the stars. Ambassador Kethvio, a being of pure thought housed in a body of living diamond, was chosen to seek answers directly from the source. His ship arrived at Earth orbit under a flag of truce, and President Elena Vasquez agreed to meet with him in humanity's ancient capital. City of Rome had survived for nearly 3,000 years, its ancient ruins standing beside modern towers, and the Zithran found himself strangely moved by the persistence of this place. Vasquez met him in a simple room overlooking the Colosseum, that ancient arena where humans had once fought and died for the entertainment of crowds. Your people built this structure to watch other humans suffer, Kethvio observed, his crystal form catching the sunlight through the window. Does this not trouble you? Vasquez looked at the ancient stones and nodded slowly. It was a dark time in our history, she admitted, but we keep it standing to remember what we are capable of becoming when we lose our way. The Zithran studied the human woman before him, searching for some explanation of the mystery that had brought him across the stars. I must ask you a question that every species in the galaxy is now asking. He said, "How did you do this?" Vasquez smiled without warmth and gestured for him to sit. "You are the oldest civilization we have ever encountered," she replied. "Surely your wisdom can provide the answer." Kethvar's crystal body hummed with frustration as he settled into a chair designed for biological beings. "We have studied your species since first contact," he admitted. "Your technology was primitive, your resources limited. Your population small compared to the great powers." He paused and his internal lights flickered with confusion. "Our projections gave humanity a 0% chance of surviving a war with the Valkyrie. Yet you have won 17 major engagements in 3 months." Vasquez stood and walked to the window, looking down at the tourists who still came to photograph the Colosseum even as war raged among the stars. "You studied our ships and our weapons and our numbers," she said quietly. "But you never studied us." She turned to face the ancient being with eyes that held depths of experience the Zithran had never seen in such a young species. "Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about how humanity evolved?" Kethvar accessed his vast knowledge stores and responded. "Immediately, your species developed on a mid-sized planet in a yellow star system. You evolved from tree-dwelling primates approximately 6 million years ago, and you developed intelligence roughly 300,000 years ago." "All correct," Vasquez acknowledged, "but incomplete." She walked to a display screen and activated an image showing ancient humans hunting across an African savanna. "We did not evolve as apex predators," she explained. "We had no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom." The image changed to show early humans chasing a wounded antelope. "We evolved as persistence hunters. Ambassador, we would wound our prey and then follow it for days, never stopping, never resting, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion." Kethvar's crystalline mind processed this information, but failed to see its relevance. "Many species hunt," he observed. "This does not explain your military capabilities." Vasquez smiled and shook her head. "You don't understand because your species has never faced extinction," she said. "The Zithran evolved in a stable environment. You spread across the stars without competition. You have never known what it means to struggle for survival." She pulled up images of human history, wars and plagues and disasters that had nearly ended their species. "Humanity has almost died a dozen times," she continued. "Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, diseases that killed half our population, wars that threatened to burn our civilization to ash." Her voice grew harder as she spoke. "Each time, we survived, not because we were stronger or better equipped, but because we refused to accept defeat." She turned to face Kethvar directly. "Your species sees war as a calculation. You measure resources and technology and population. You feed the numbers into your computers and predict the outcome." The Zithran nodded because this was exactly how civilized species conducted warfare. "Humans see war as survival," Vasquez said. "When our existence is threatened, something very old wakes up inside us. Something that doesn't care about odds or projections or logical outcomes." She walked closer to the crystalline being until she stood just inches away. "Your ancestors conquered through superiority. They saw weaker species and crushed them because they could." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Our ancestors conquered through spite, through refusing to lie down and die when every logical analysis said we should." She stepped back and her expression softened slightly. "For 30 years, the Valkyrie pushed us closer and closer to extinction. They took our worlds, killed our people, and convinced themselves that we would eventually accept our fate." She shook her head slowly. "Instead, they triggered the deepest instinct our species possesses, the absolute refusal to die quietly." Kethvar sat in silence for a long moment as his ancient mind struggled to integrate this new understanding. "You are saying," he finally responded, That your species becomes more dangerous when cornered. Not less, Vasquez nodded. Every human child grows up hearing stories of ancestors who survived impossible situations. Of people who crawled through deserts without water, who escaped from concentration camps, who rebuilt cities from rubble. She gestured toward the window and the ancient stones beyond. That arena out there was filled with slaves who were supposed to die for entertainment. But some of them fought so hard that they earned their freedom. Her eyes met the Zithran's crystalline gaze. We taught our children that surrender means death. That fighting means at least a chance. And we passed that lesson down for 10,000 generations. Kethvar rose slowly from his chair, his mind finally understanding what his people had failed to see. The council believed it was dealing with a young species that would behave rationally, he said. Instead, you were dealing with survival instincts older than rational thought. Vasquez nodded grimly. The Velthari made a mistake that predators throughout our history have made, she replied. They assumed that because we could be hurt, we could be broken. She walked him to the door as their meeting concluded. They'd pushed us to the edge of extinction and expected us to fall. Instead, they reminded us of what we truly are. The Zithran ambassador returned to his ship with a message that would change galactic history within a week. The Zithran collective formally declared neutrality in the human Velthari. Conflict, other species followed as the recording of their conversation spread across 1,000 worlds for the first time. The galaxy began to understand that humanity was not a weak species pretending to be strong. They were a dangerous species that had been pretending to be weak. And now the pretending was over. The Velthari High Speaker stood before the assembled war council of his dying empire and delivered the speech. That would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. We have underestimated the humans, he admitted, his 4 eyes scanning the grim faces of his generals. We have lost 17 battles and nearly 400 ships, and our allies abandon us one by one. He slammed his fist against the command table, and the room trembled. But we are still the Velthari Dominion. We have conquered 100 species, and we will not fall to these primitives. He activated the strategic display, and every officer in the room saw the plan that would end humanity once and for all. We will commit every remaining ship to a single decisive battle, he declared. Over 2,000 vessels gathered at Thessalonica Prime, where the humans have established their forward command. His generals shifted nervously because this strategy meant abandoning the defense of their own territories. If we win, the human threat ends forever, the High Speaker continued. If we lose, there will be no empire left to defend anyway. One by one, the generals nodded their agreement because they understood that half measures had failed it. It was time for Total War Admiral Marcus Chun received intelligence about the Velthari, gathering 3 days before their fleet departed. And he knew immediately that this would be the battle that decided everything. He stood in the war room on Thessalonica, Prime surrounded by his most trusted officers as they studied the enemy's numbers. 2,147 ships. Confirmed. His intelligence chief reported, including 12 Planet Killer-class dreadnoughts, Chen had only 900 vessels available, and many of those were damaged from previous engagements. They're betting everything on one throw, General Tanaka observed. If we break them here, the war is over. Chung nodded slowly and thought about the millions of lives that would be lost in the coming battle, both human and Velthari. Get me a secure channel to President Vasquez, he ordered. She needs to know what we're facing. Elena Vasquez listened to the Admiral's report in silence, her face revealing nothing of the storm inside her heart. What do you need to win this battle? She asked when he finished. Chen hesitated because he knew the cost of what he was about to request. I need you to authorize the release of our remaining strategic reserves. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we've been holding back. He paused, and his voice dropped lower. And I need you to understand that even if we win, we will lose hundreds of thousands of our people. Vasquez closed her eyes for a long moment. seeing the faces of all those who would die in the battle to come. "Win this war, Admiral," she finally said. "Win it so their deaths mean something." The Battle of Thessalonica Prime began at dawn on a planet that had once been a Vulturi resort world. Its skies now filled with the largest fleet engagement in galactic history. Chen deployed his forces in a formation that seemed suicidal to Vulturi tacticians, spreading his ships thin across a wide arc. Instead of concentrating them for mutual defense, the Vulturi commander saw this and smiled, ordering his fleet to advance in a wedge formation designed to cut through the human line and destroy them piece by piece. What he didn't realize was that Chen was using humanity's understanding of Vulturi psychology against them. The Vulturi were bred for hierarchy and obedience. Their officers trained to follow established doctrine without question. Their ships designed to operate as parts of a larger coordinated whole. When the battle began, human hackers unleashed a new version of the Helix virus directly into the Vulturi command network within minutes. The carefully choreographed enemy formation began to fall apart as ships received conflicting orders, as targeting systems identified friendly vessels as enemies, as communication channels filled with static and confusion. Chen watched the chaos spread through the enemy fleet and gave the order that would determine the battle's outcome. All ships, execute Operation Nightmare. Human vessels suddenly changed their behavior, abandoning predictable combat patterns for something no Vulturi computer could anticipate. They attacked in waves that followed no logical sequence, retreating randomly, advancing without apparent purpose, creating a battlefield of pure chaos that the enemy could not process. Vulturi captains screamed for guidance from commanders, who could not respond while human ships picked them apart with surgical precision. But the Vulturi did not break, despite the confusion. Despite the losses, they kept fighting with the desperate courage of beings who knew their civilization depended on victory. The battle that Chen had hoped would end in hours stretched into days, as both sides bled and died among the stars on the third day. General Tanaka led a ground assault against the Vulturi command center on Thessalonica Prime's surface. Her Marines fighting through streets filled with enemy soldiers. She used tactics that horrified her Vulturi opponents, broadcasting the screams of dying enemies through captured communication systems, attacking during rest periods, refusing to accept surrender from officers while showing mercy to common soldiers. The psychological warfare shattered enemy morale faster than bullets ever could. By the fifth day, the Vulturi fleet had lost half its strength, while human losses approached 40%. And still neither side would yield. Admiral Chen stood on his bridge surrounded by damage reports and casualty lists, his face gray with exhaustion and grief. "Sir," his tactical officer reported with a voice thick with emotion, "the enemy flagship is breaking formation. They're trying to retreat." Chen looked at the display and saw that the Vulturi High Speaker's personal vessel was indeed turning away from the battle. "All ships capable of pursuit, follow them," he ordered. "This ends today." The final engagement lasted less than an hour as human vessels surrounded the fleeing remnants of the Vulturi fleet. The High Speaker refused to surrender, ordering his remaining ships to fight to the last, and so they did. When the last Vulturi weapon fell silent, the Vulturi dominion that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries existed only in history books. Admiral Chen sat alone in his quarters after the battle, unable to celebrate the victory that had cost so many lives. The numbers scrolled across his screen without mercy. 2,300,000 humans dead, over 4 million Vulturi dead, entire families erased, ships full of young soldiers who would never return home. Dreams and hopes and futures extinguished forever. President Vasquez arrived at Thessalonica Prime 2 days later to address the surviving fleet and honor the fallen. She stood in the memorial hall that had been hastily constructed from the wreckage of both human and Vulturi vessels, reading the names of the dead projected on walls that stretched beyond sight. "We didn't want this," she whispered as tears fell from her eyes. "We only wanted to be left alone." Chun stood beside her in silence, because there were no words adequate for this moment. Make it worth something. Marcus, she finally said, make sure this never happens again. The Admiral nodded slowly and made a promise that he would keep for the rest of his life. The Velthari were defeated, but the war was not truly over now. Came the harder task of building. A peace that would honor the sacrifice of millions, and humanity would have to decide what kind of species they wanted to become. 1 year after President Elena Vasquez declared war on the Galactic Council, representatives from 47 species gathered on Earth to witness the birth of a new order. They came in ships that had once carried weapons of war, now stripped of their armaments and flying flags of truce that would have seemed impossible just months before. The Great Assembly Hall in Geneva had been rebuilt specifically for this moment. Its architecture designed to hold beings of every shape and size. From the crystalline Zitherine to the gaseous methane collective to the insectoid. Crethian Swarmman's President Vasquez stood at the central podium and looked out at faces that had once belonged to enemies, to species that had laughed at humanity, and called them animals, and tried to erase them from the stars, every eye and sensor and perceptual organ. In the room focused on the small, human woman who had brought the mightiest empire in galactic history to its knees. She could have demanded anything. The assembled species knew this and trembled as they waited to learn their fate. Human fleets now controlled more territory than any power in recorded history. Human weapons technology had surpassed civilizations thousands of years their senior, and human soldiers had proven themselves capable of defeating any opponent in any terrain. This was the moment when empires were usually forged, when conquerors claimed their prize and the defeated accepted chains. Vasquez cleared her throat and began to speak. Her words translated into 1,000 languages and broadcast across 1,000,000 worlds. 13 months ago, I stood before the Galactic Council and declared that humanity would no longer accept the role you had assigned us. Her voice carried clearly through the silent hall. We fought a war that none of us wanted. A war that killed millions of sentient beings. A war that destroyed worlds and shattered families, and left wounds that will take generations to heal. She paused, and her eyes swept across the assembled delegates. Today, we could do to you what you tried to do to us. The delegates shifted nervously as the human fleet commanders in attendance stood straighter. We have the power, Vasquez continued. We have the military strength to impose our will on every species in this room, to take your worlds and your resources and your futures, just as you once took ours. She let the words hang in the air for a long moment. But we are not you. The tension in the room shifted to confusion as delegates exchanged uncertain glances. Humanity did not fight this war to become the new oppressors, Vasquez declared. We fought to survive, and now that we have survived, we must decide what kind of species we want to be. She pressed a button and a document appeared on screens throughout the hall. This is the Terran Accords, a framework for a new galactic civilization built on principles that have never before been tried. She began to read the key provisions. First, every sentient species is recognized as sovereign and equal, regardless of age or technology or military power. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. Second, no species may colonize or exploit the territory of another without freely given consent. The Crethian ambassador's mandibles clicked in shock. Third, advanced civilizations have a duty to assist younger species in their development, not to subjugate them. The hall erupted in confused whispers as delegates struggled to understand what they were hearing. Fourth, disputes between species will be resolved through arbitration by a council where every voice carries equal weight. Vasquez lowered the document and looked directly at the cameras, broadcasting her words across the galaxy. We are demanding nothing from you except a promise, she said. A promise that what happened to humanity will never happen to any species again. The Zithran ambassador Kethva rose from his seat, his crystalline form glowing with emotion that his species rarely displayed. "President Vasquez," he said, his ancient voice filled with wonder. "In 50,000 years of galactic history, no species has ever won a war and then offered peace without conquest." Vasquez nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it is time for something new." A Veltari delegate in the back of the hall stood on trembling legs, and the room fell instantly silent as everyone recognized the survivor of a defeated empire. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking with grief and confusion. "After everything my people did to yours, after the atrocities and the humiliations and the deaths, why would you spare us?" Vasquez looked at the broken being who had once belonged to a species that ruled the stars, and she saw in him the same fear that humanity had carried for 30 years. "Because making you suffer would not bring back our dead," she answered gently. "And because someone has to break the cycle of hatred that has defined this galaxy for too long." She stepped down from the podium and walked through the crowd of delegates until she stood before the Veltari survivor. "Your children did not choose this war," she said. "Your artists and teachers and healers did not fire the weapons that killed our people." She extended her hand in the human gesture of peace. "I will not punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty, and I will not become the monster I fought against." The Veltari looked at her hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out and grasped it with his own. The image was broadcast across the galaxy, a symbol of reconciliation that would be remembered for centuries. The signing of the Terran Accords took 3 days as each species added their agreement to the document that would reshape galactic civilization when it was complete. Vasquez addressed the assembly one final time. "We have all lost something in this war," she said. "We have lost friends and family and innocence. We have learned terrible things about ourselves and each other." She looked out at the gathered representatives with eyes that held both sorrow and hope. "But we have also gained something precious, a chance to build something better than what came before." She raised her hand in farewell. The human philosopher once said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So let us remember this moment. Let us remember the cost of hatred and fear, and let us choose a different path. The assembly rose as one as President Elena Vasquez walked out of the hall and into history in the years that followed. The Terran Accords became the foundation of a new galactic order, one built on cooperation rather than domination, on mutual respect rather than hierarchies of power. Humanity took its place among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as something new, a species that had proven it could wage war and then chosen to build peace. Historians would debate for centuries whether humans were heroes or merely fortunate, whether their mercy was noble or simply practical. Children across 1,000 worlds grew up learning one lesson that no one ever forgot: never mistake kindness for weakness, never underestimate a species that refuses to die, and never ever corner a human in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in places where old soldiers gathered to remember fallen friends. Humans and former enemies sometimes shared drinks and told stories of the war that changed everything. They spoke of Admiral Chun, who had retired to a small farm on Mars where he grew vegetables and refused to discuss the battles that had made him legend. They spoke of General Tanaka, who had become the first human ambassador to the rebuilt Veltari civilization, working to heal the wounds she had once inflicted, and they spoke of Elena Vasquez, who had served 3 more terms as president before finally stepping down to write her memoirs. In a small house overlooking the Colosseum, when reporters asked her what she wanted to be remembered for, she always gave the same answer: "I want to be remembered as the person who proved that humanity could win a war and still keep its soul." And so they did.